Welcome back to Field Notes, the infrastructure podcast, where we dig into the stories, technologies, and the people shaping the future of broadband, energy, and everything in between. I'm your host, Abby Crawford, and I am thrilled to be joined by someone who has been at the forefront of rural broadband and infrastructure innovation, Mr. Joe Hickey. In this episode, we'll talk about the evolution of rural broadband, the differences between the Canadian and American infrastructure landscapes, and where Joe sees the biggest opportunities and challenges ahead. We'll also dive into leadership lessons, emerging technologies, and what it really takes to build a resilient, future-ready network. Welcome, Joe. Thank you so much for being here. It is an honor to have you.
Thank you, Abby. It's great to be here and glad that we could finally connect. For your viewers, as you know, we've rescheduled it a few times, given my schedule and travel schedule and trying to squeeze vacations in, but glad that we could finally get some time together. So happy to participate.
We're so happy to have you. Thank you for taking the time. Joe, I want to kick things off just by hearing a little bit about your personal journey. So you have had such a wide-ranging impact on broadband and infrastructure. What first drew you into this space, and then also what continues to fuel your passion for it today?
Yeah, so I started my career after doing a mechanical engineering degree in school. I started with a small Canadian telecom company called Northern Telecom, which became Nortel, which became Nortel Networks, which became bankrupt after I left. But Nortel was a great training ground. My first experience in broadband was 28.8 kilobit dial-up networking with a partner that Nortel had in 1996 called Shiva Corporation. And the screeching modem days, and then we're going to introduce K56 Flex. It's going to double the speed. And it's like, oh, this is awesome, right? And AOL dial-up modems. And then this thing called ADSL came along, and everybody's like, oh my God, that's like 20 times faster, 1 megabits. That's it. Dial-up is dead, right? And sure enough, ADSL took over. But now we're talking about speeds, 1,000 to 10,000 times faster, right? With gigabit fiber. And so the thing about telecom, every generation of technology, it all starts new, but it's like I call it the Olympic ideal: higher, faster, stronger. And so, every time a new technology comes along, you get re-energized to, tell the same messages, but with different speeds and feeds and things like that, and enabling more capabilities. So I like to tell my kids that, any job that you have, you should feel passionate about it.
And,
for
sure.
I just crossed 35 years in the industry. I know I don't look like that old, but anyway,
That's
I've
awesome. Congratulations.
I've earned every one of these. My oldest daughter, she's 22, just graduated from psychology at Queens, and she's planning on doing a law degree. And she said, I hope I'm as passionate about what I do as like you are about, telecom 35 years later. And so passion to make a difference, right? So when I started at Northern Telecom, we had something that we called the, every company has a mission, core value, vision, and core values, right? So the mission of Northern Telecom was called the Spirit of Northern Telecom. And the mission was people coming together through communications to make the world a better place. So my first job at Nortel, I was a manufacturing engineer making Meridian 1 telephone sets in Belleville, Ontario. So you think, okay, how do you get inspired making telephone sets? But, I saw that every day I was showing up and the work that I was doing was going to make it easier for people around the world to communicate. And so here we are 35 years later, and now we're bringing fiber to the home to rural Canada, which the state-of-the-art technology today is 5 megabit download speeds and 1 megabit upload with ADSL, right? That technology from 30 years ago. And, we're enabling the next generation of technology to people who are unconnected. And so, the passion continues to drive me in that regard. And I keep saying to my kids, be passionate about what you do. But I saw an interesting corollary to the passion story. Jensen from NVIDIA, the CEO, and he said, passion is key to anything that you do. but and I'm not, I was going to go back and look at the word that he used. I like to use the word resilience, but he used it was fortitude or perseverance or something along that lines, that every day is not a good day. So
Right.
passion kind of brings a certain attitude, but
Right.
you got to get through these tough times as well. And so,
Hmm.
the passion in and of itself is not sufficient. You've got to have fortitude, right? Or
Hmm.
resilience, and, like those kind of words, right? And I had to go back and see what actual word he used, but I'm like, oh, that's an interesting take on it, because I always say, jobs are 10% really interesting and 90% grind, but it's the 10% really interesting that makes the 90% grind worthwhile. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like an interesting take on, passion plus, if you will, right? So I thought that was pretty cool by
Yeah.
Jensen Wong.
It kind of makes me think of the whole discipline over motivation thing. Your discipline is your passion, and that's why you're able to keep going. And then
Yeah,
you don't always wake up motivated.
yeah,
I know I don't. This is why I love having these conversations, because I just love speaking to people that are passionate about it. And it's
yeah,
so clear that your passion hasn't faded at all, which I love.
yeah.
And given how long you have been in the industry, I'm just curious what you would say has changed the most since you've gotten started, whether it's technology or policy or even your passion. What stands out to you the most?
I think every generation, you can enable more things, right? So you think,
Yeah,
oh, like this will be the last wave, and it's like it never is the last wave, right? The waves keep coming, because
so true.
I call broadband. It's like air. Whatever speed you have, you'll end up figuring out a way to fill it. So you put air in a room, it's going to expand until it fills the room, right? And so
I love
the
that.
broadband pipe is like
Cool.
that. So if you only had a meg, you're going to figure out things that you can do with a meg, right? Email and, maybe Facebook. And if you have a gig, you're going to figure out, oh, streaming, Netflix, a few other things. Then if you had 10 gig, it's like, okay, so now I can do high res imagery, medical MRIs, hospital to hospital transactions, so as you go up to speeds, the ability to do more. And now if you look at, AI and those kind of things that we're talking about, I
Yeah.
mean, the world's compute is like quadrupling almost every year, right? So it's just the pace of change. One of the core values at Nortel was we embrace change and reward innovation. And that always stuck with me, that I was never afraid of change. I always wanted to be at the forefront of being a change or thought leader. And so that early training kind of always stayed with me. So if one thing is, the pace of change is ever quickening, and that actually makes you excited about it too, right? I never ever, some people are resistant to change, right?
Yeah.
But people are saying, well, here's the bad things that AI could do. And, there are certainly things that could happen, right?
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, it can also do a lot of great things. And we should focus on, like, enabling more of the great things that technology can bring to the table. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's part of just leadership in general, is being open to change, because then your influence is influencing other people who might not be up for the change. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
completely agree. So it sounds like you have seen a lot change over the years,
yeah.
changed a lot yourself. And with those kind of perspectives, I imagine that you've also noticed some key differences depending on where the work is happening. So given that you're based in Canada,
That's
um,
correct.
how would you compare the rural broadband landscape there to what you see happening in the US? What are the major differences that you see?
Yeah. So in my career, I've worked in Canada. I've lived and worked in Silicon Valley for 5 years in the US. So the company that I founded, Rock Networks,
Yes.
side story, uh, Newfoundland, where I'm originally from, which is the east coast of Canada, is affectionately known as the Rock. And Alcatraz is also the Rock. And the
Oh,
networks came from Nortel Networks. So that's how I came up with the name of the company. And Rock
I love
Networks, my
that.
company, was acquired by Pomegranate a couple of years ago. And I've also lived and worked in India, and I've done business in around 40 countries around the world. I spent two
Wow.
years living in India, remotely commuting from Canada, um, in the Indian wireless sector. And so Silicon Valley was the hotbed of innovation. You go to India and you see a completely different approach to technology in terms of how do we get like hundreds of millions of people connected? Like in Canada,
Yeah.
we're talking about millions. In the
Much
US, it's
bigger.
maybe tens of millions. In India,
Yeah.
it's like, how do we connect 500 million, right? And so the
Wow.
scale in India is much larger. So the pace of rollouts when I was there, it's a few years ago now, but at the time, 3G and 4G wireless was rolling out, and companies like Bharti and Rio or Geo, the Reliance folks were rolling out networks, and they were rolling out 30,000 cell sites per year. And
Wow.
like that's more than the entire Canadian market in one year, right?
Wow.
So depending on the market that you go to, the scale is much different. So the scale in the US versus Canada is like, 10 times the population, 10 times the number of unconnected people, maybe even a little
Right.
bit lower, more in the US, because Canada actually has a higher fiber penetration than the US today. But so that's one difference, I guess. The second difference is Canada has a lot more rural
Yeah.
like areas, right? So
Right.
most of the population of Canada lives within 150 miles of the U.S. border,
Right.
49th parallel, and yet we still have to connect everybody in the northern areas. So the number of we like to use the homes per route mile or route kilometer. And in Canada, you might have like in the project that we're doing with in Northern Ontario, we're deploying 2,700 kilometers of fiber to
Wow.
connect 19,000 underserved homes.
That's awesome.
So, there's only a couple homes per route kilometer, right? Or, 5 homes per mile, right? And
Yeah.
so, that kind of rural density, there are pockets in the United States with that kind of density as well, which the BEAD system and, things like that are trying to resolve. So
Hmm.
that's one difference, I would say. But there are pockets in the US that are similar to these very large areas in Canada in terms of like it's everywhere in Canada, right? In terms of rural broadband requirements. Um, the second thing I would say in the US, there's a lot more private sector funding. So the private credit
Yeah.
market, the private equity market, you
Yeah.
see KKR, Blackstone, BlackRock, and all of those groups kind of investing or co-investing with, fiber overbuild companies like Allo Fiber or even
Hmm.
Ziply, which was acquired by Bell.
Hmm.
T-Mobile is partnering with MetroNet, right? So
Yeah.
um, that pace in the US and that availability of capital is a lot larger in the US. First, in Canada, we've been more dependent on government grant levels, sort of like
Okay.
RDOF in the US or BEAD, but it's very critical in Canada. And without the Universal Broadband Fund at the federal government, which is about $3.5 billion, or the Ontario government, which took the lead to introduce broadband funding about 4 months after COVID lockdown started, they realized, oh my God, we got to do something here.
We need
So
this.
Ontario itself put forward $4 billion of funding. So our projects are primarily driven by grant money. And so then another unique thing in Canada is that the government has this group called Canada Infrastructure Bank. So they provided $2 billion of funding for low interest loans from the bank. So it's a federal corporation, if you will. And they loan that at 20-year project financing terms. So you're able to get project financing to offset the equity um, gap in terms of internal rate of return. So they don't
Okay.
want excessive returns, but they basically want appropriate returns. And so that kind of bridged the gap because it's much more rural, right? And
Yeah.
so that is a bit of a unique thing in Canada. And then from a like there's similarities as well. So the similarities are everybody needs to get permits in order to go, pole attachments.
Right.
So,
That's the
the
big
make
one.
ready is the biggest, you know, issue, I guess. You can do your surveys, you can use LiDAR, you can create your digital twin, and then at some point you got to attach a piece of fiber to a pole, right?
Yep.
And so, aerial in Canada, in most provinces, is about 90% of the deployment. And
Oh,
so
okay.
you have
Wow.
to go through the local distribution companies. In Ontario, it's Hydro One. In Quebec, it's Hydro Quebec primarily. But our project has Algoma Power, Espanola Hydro. We've got Bell Canada poles. We've got Eastlink poles. So every one of those local distribution companies you actually have to basically work with in order to gain access to their poles under a joint use agreement. So that is similar to the US where you're
Yeah.
deploying in rural America and you're a cable company and you got to go through the electrical co-op, you got to go through so and in a particular county there can be two or three, right? So it's similar from that perspective, but that's the single largest impediment. So one of the things we've done from a Pomegranate and Rock Networks perspective, which the proof is still in the pudding, but we did an analysis of pole loading, and this is maybe instructive to all of your US colleagues as well. And so when you do your spider calculations and you say, okay, this pole needs to be replaced because we're putting a 288 strand fiber on it. And so you got to pay the pole replacement fee. And so then we said, okay, well, let's load it with a 144 strand, a 96 strand, a 72, a 48, a 22, 24, and like all the way down to single strand. And
Yeah.
what we found is that the science says that 144 fibers and below, you actually don't really need to do the engineering work. And so because the load is actually imperceptible addition to the pole. So we presented that to the province of Ontario and said, this is the single biggest thing you can do from a regulatory framework perspective, which Ontario did a lot of work in terms of trying to speed up the make ready process, but we're still behind on the government's target by the end of this year. And that won't be met. So we'll see, what the revised target will be. But we basically have said to the new Ministry of Energy and Mines that's responsible for the broadband in Ontario now, that the single biggest thing they can do is waive the requirement for doing all of the engineering calculations and just let us attach if it's 144 strands and below.
Yeah.
Now, then it's like, well, we have another goal in the government. The other goal is we want to increase the amount of electricity because there's a big demand on the grid, big demands in the US with all these data centers, right? And so Ontario as a province wants to add 70 gigawatts of new capacity to the province. So basically the electrical grid needs to be upgraded. So in order to upgrade the electrical grid, you got to know what's already there.
Right.
So there is a goal of having done all of these engineering analysis that you'll know what the state of the electrical grid is. So our approach then is say, okay, you have this broader goal that you need this done as well. Let us do the attachment, and in the background, we'll still do the engineering analysis, and you still get your digital twin of all the poles in the network. So you can accomplish both policy objectives
Yeah.
without hindering the timeline for deployment. So that's a key learning that we've gotten to in our project in Ontario, and hopefully the government will act on it because that will speed up our deployment. But that's a key message even for US entities as well. So,
Well, you just answered my next question because it made me wonder if there were any specific strategies that the US could adopt from Canada or vice versa, but that
yeah.
sounds right there.
From a regulatory framework, this is actually the single biggest thing in my mind, at least, that can be done because the make ready process is anywhere from 9 to 24 months.
Yeah.
So if you can say waive that, still do the work in the background so that the local distribution company still has the analysis, but allow the attachments as long as it's less than 144 strand fiber, which is most of the fiber, right? Yeah, so that's a key learning that we've gotten to. So
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that with us.
you're welcome.
Very cool. I want to switch gears a little bit. You have been deeply involved in mergers and acquisitions side of the industry.
Yep.
When you're evaluating a company for a potential partnership or acquisition, what are the key things that you look for?
So Pomegranate, the company that acquired Rock Networks, my company where I was the founder, Pomegranate has pretty much built the company through the M&A route. So originally it started with a product company building Wi-Fi routers.
Yeah.
Then they got a government grant to build a network on the East Coast in Newfoundland, which was a wireless network. And then once that network was built, they had an asset base to work from. They used asset-based lenders to loan them money to buy three more companies. Actually, they bought four more. And then they started to scale up them with fiber grants in Quebec. And then Rock Networks became their largest acquisition for the project in Northern Ontario. So the company has grown via acquisition. Now, when we look at acquisitions, we're trying to assess first the leadership team, right? So obviously that's critical. but we're looking for companies that maybe need extra working capital to scale. They're
Okay.
at the point that a lot of the groundwork has maybe been done. So Rock Networks, we were pretty much finished, but we needed that extra capital. So Pomegranate brought that to the table. Um, and so we've been able to scale the project based on that. So that is a key piece. And then, is the business profitable at some level?
Right.
And then normally the way we would look to structure a deal is you have some upfront cash, there's a vendor take back, and then there's maybe equity in Pomegranate. That's kind of the structure of the Rock Networks deal. And so being able to get to that management structure. Now we're not doing the kind of scale that is happening in the US, like Bell's spending 5.7 billion on Ziply fiber and T-Mobile with billions on Metro Connect, right? That's
Right.
not the scale that Pomegranate is at. Our goal is, we're at by the middle of next year, we'll be around 100,000 passings, and our goal in the next 4 years is to get to 300,000 in primarily Ontario and Quebec. So that's where we're
Wow.
looking at our business growth. And so that would make us kind of a solid tier two player in the market, if you will,
Yeah.
right? So right now we're in the tier three category. And so acquisitions may be part of the mix as we look to scale up. So,
Okay.
but it comes down to the management team and where the business is in an inflection point, right? So,
Right. So as you were just talking about with consolidation, it's continuing across the industry, especially in rural markets. How do you see that shaping the future of broadband? Is it helping or hurting innovation? What do you think?
so scaling up, like there's a lot of small ISPs, right? So
Right.
they're not limited by their imagination, right? Because
Right.
they're like they started from scratch, right? So somebody
Yeah.
had an idea and built an ISP,
Yeah.
but they are limited by capital. And so the M&A route allows the founder, shareholder, if you will, to kind of like capitalize on the work that they've done to date, but
Yeah.
also give, and this is where the secret is in the sauce of the deal, I guess, how do you make it such that the founders want to stay around and actually help to grow the business after? Because I think
Right.
that retention of the key talent is crucial. So
Yeah.
having a structure like that is absolutely critical. But what that does is create optionality for customers that you have more than the big three in Canada, right? Or the big
Right.
four in the US, right? And these mid-scale companies are actually pushing the fiber deployment in Canada and in the US. And
Right.
so Metro Connect is not longer, mid-scale or whatever, but you have a lot of companies like Allo Fiber, companies of that ilk that are really pushing in markets that the big telcos, just ignore. And
Yeah.
so the tier two and tier three markets in the US, which would almost be tier one and tier two in Canada, right, from a scale, um, those markets wouldn't be getting any broadband if it wasn't for a lot of these, private equity and private credit funded companies that are just building in areas where the density is sufficient that if you get to a 40% penetration rate, which is a minimum that you kind of need to think about, that you can, create a profitable business. Because once you bring in private credit or private
Yeah.
equity, the goal is profitability, right? So otherwise you
Right.
don't get the exit. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Cool. Um, so I want to talk about tech for a moment.
Yep.
That's the talk of the industry, I feel like right now. What innovations have you seen or emerging technologies that you're most excited about in the broadband and infrastructure space?
So one thing we're doing, so our technology partner on the active infrastructure is Nokia, right? One of the
Yeah,
global leaders
familiar
in
with Nokia for sure.
XGS-PON and PON. And so our project in Northern Ontario is we are rolling out the first 25 gig PON in rural Canada. So we will
Oh,
have the fastest network in Canada in Northern Ontario, right? Faster than downtown
wow.
Toronto, right? So Nokia has
Nice.
been part of that. And so you think about, okay, well, a residence is not going to go for 25 gig PON, but a hospital in Elliott Lake,
Yeah.
which is in Northern Ontario, the hospital in Elliott Lake today, if they have an MRI that needs to be sent to sick kids in Toronto, they
Hmm.
basically have to put it on a, external drive and courier to Toronto because they don't have enough broadband infrastructure to basically set that up and send it as a file. And so there's
Wow.
always these timeout issues in terms of MRIs because like an MRI is a large file, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have a 25 gig infrastructure for a hospital or even 10 gig for that matter, that's the scale that large facilities will need, right? So that allows us to
Right.
meet the, let's say we call them anchor institutions in Canada. So hospitals, schools, universities, I guess also called the mesh sector or mush sector, municipalities, education, schools and hospitals. So that's one piece. The second piece that we're doing with Nokia is deploying their integrated Wi-Fi 7 router with the actual unit. And so we have an integrated solution that is capable of 10 gig. And so, any technology that deploys 10 gig to the home I would call future proof, at least for the
Hmm.
next 5 years. Like, like most homes are like we're going and replacing 5 megabit DSL, right? So
Right.
even if the customer doesn't sign up for a 10 gig connection and they sign up for a gigabit or 2 gig or 3 gig, uh, we actually have that headroom available that through a software change, right? You basically can enable future growth in the technology, the capability and speeds. And
Yeah.
so that is an interesting piece. The third thing we're doing is something called digital fiber. And so one of the things we partnered with a company and within the fiber strand itself, like you think about all this passive optical, like passive equipment, right? So
Hmm.
fibers, foscs, vaults, all that kind of stuff that is the plumbing that makes the Nokia
It,
stuff excited, right? To
yeah.
light up. But, fairly boring from otherwise thinking about it, right? And so what we've done with our partner, and I won't disclose their name today, but maybe they will disclose it after they see the podcast, uh, is we've introduced digital fiber. So within the fiber strand itself, as you know, you can put trace wires and other things other than the glass, right?
Mhm.
So they've got basically a digital trace wire, but it's not a copper. It's basically a 1 meter marker built into the fiber that we can read through a UHF transmitter. And
Okay.
as the fiber is being deployed, we know exactly what's being deployed. And so they've also extended that to their FOSCs and vaults. And
Yeah.
basically, as a FOSC is deployed, we know the ID of the FOSC and the GIS location of the FOSC. And so as we're building the network, we basically create a digital twin at the same time.
Wow.
Now there are construction tools like Vitruvi and Oculus and Render, companies of that ilk that also report on the stage of construction. But what we've done with the digital fiber is it's in real time and uploaded to the cloud. Or if you don't have a cellular capability at site, when you return to depot, basically it's uploaded to the cloud. So it's not a take pictures and tell us how many fiber how many meters or kilometers or miles of fiber that you deployed today and plug that into a tool manually. It is just automatically captured
Learning.
in the cloud. And so we think this digital fiber is one of the best innovations to come into fiber market in a long time. And it's not from the large players, right? So again,
Right.
innovations
Right.
sometimes come with new small startups that
Yeah.
are looking to, break into a market with a different approach. And so this partner, we Pomegranate actually selected before they acquired Rock Networks, and it was a company that when they were deploying in the Quebec market, this digital fiber wasn't developed at the time, so we jointly developed it with them. And you make these technology and partner decisions that 4 years ago, because of supply chain constraints and COVID, you partner with somebody that can help you get around a supply constraint, and then
Yeah.
you become joint partners as you move forward, right? And those partnerships endure. So we could go to the larger players now with no supply constraints and buy fiber, but we partner with this company, and now we're going to scale the businesses together, right? So those kind of things and innovations, I think are critical. The final thing is we are seeing a lot more, and you're seeing that in the US as well, a lot more open access networks, right? So we
Mm.
partner with a company called COS Systems, one of the open access market leaders. And from our original proposal to the federal government in March 15th of 2021, the defining day in UBF history in Canada, the Universal Broadband Fund, that was the date all your applications were due. We submitted that we would build an open access network and give consumer choice in rural Canada, where it's like Henry Ford, you can have it in any color as long as it's black, right? You only have one choice. And we're going to enable consumer choice for the first time to rural Canadians. So that's pretty exciting. Not
That's
necessarily
awesome.
always, sometimes it's a business approach that's the innovation versus technology. But sometimes for the business, you need the technology like a COS platform to enable it, right? So
Yes. So my takeaway there is don't overlook the smaller companies. You never know what they've got, what they're working on, right?
yeah, so we have a mix of small company partners, and then we have
Right.
Nokia, right? So,
Yeah.
like Nokia is at the bleeding edge of like PON and 25 gig PON and soon to be 50 gig and eventually 100 gig. So that kind of capital and R&D intensive partner is critical. But
Yeah.
then you got these little innovations down below, and it's like that can make a big difference on the business. So
Yeah. I love to hear that. So all of this kind of stems from leadership, right? I mean, you've led teams, you've built companies, you've advised others, you've given great advice. What is one leadership lesson that has really stuck with you over the years?
hmm. um, that's an interesting question. So um, I always believe that partnerships make everybody better.
Yeah.
Uh, and so growing together with key partners enables you through your ecosystem to remove bottlenecks that you otherwise would be trying to figure out yourself. So strengthen numbers, if you will. So
Yeah.
partnerships are key to any company's success. A lot of people sometimes think that they're insular and they say, oh, we can't share this idea with anybody. And so we keep it, but then the idea doesn't blossom either, right? So you got an idea that means nothing, right?
Right.
Because you can't put it into practice. And so um, partners are the key to success is one thing I would say. And the partners aren't always technology partners. So to roll out a network, you need capital. So you need funding partners. So, the
Right.
funding partners for our project in Northern Ontario are the federal government, the Ontario government, Canada Infrastructure Bank. We have Stonebridge Financial, who has provided some of the 20-year project financing for the project. So, and then we have a large tier one bank in Canada that is now our main funding partner for the Pomegranate Group. And so the financing piece is equally as important, right? So you got to have, and
Mhm.
so you can't do all that yourself. And so the partnerships are critical in my mind. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is, um, irrespective of everything, it always comes down to the people and inspiring your team to, work through these, hardships like resilience and perseverance and fortitude. And so, as a leader, I don't do everything. In fact, I don't do most of the things, right? And so, but I can tell people what they need to get done, right? So, uh, and I have my own tasks as well, but an individual cannot achieve it themselves, and so it's always the effort
Yeah.
of the team. Uh,
100%.
I've won a few industry awards. I've been a ranked top 50 CEO and things like that, and those accolades are good and they personally make me feel good, obviously, right? The Broadband Nation Award that I got for connecting the unconnected in Canada was, I would say, one of the crowning achievements, I suppose, up to this
Kind of a
point in my
big deal.
career.
Yeah.
But that isn't just a Joe Hickey award. That's Joe Hickey and his team award. And that's what I always say to the team, I'm the face, and I get that recognition, but it wouldn't happen without the team behind me. So I'm always appreciative of the efforts of people. And so the EQ side of leadership is very important, right? The emotional piece that you're helping people because people have a lot of things going on outside of work, right?
Yeah.
COVID was very stressful on a lot of families, children who didn't get to, like my daughter didn't get to graduate in grade 12, like she missed her graduation because the school was in lockdown, right? So,
Yeah.
a lot of people had to deal with things beyond the work environment. So I think always being sensitive to that, that's why I call it the emotional quotient versus the IQ, right? So is important for any leader to take note of and make sure that you have a company, I wouldn't even call it a policy, but a culture, I guess, right? That, supports the team. And sometimes you got to lift people up and sometimes people lift you up, right? And so I think that would be the two things I would say: partnerships and people.
Partnerships and people, the two P's.
Yeah. Yes.
Got it. I took notes. Joe, before I let you go, I always like to end with this. If you could leave our listeners, especially those working in or trying to enter the broadband infrastructure space, with one piece of advice or encouragement, what would
Yeah.
it be?
Wow. Well, I've been 35 years in technology, right? So I mean, like it's basically I live, eat, and breathe it every day, right? So, um, and pick something like if you think about telecom in general or broadband, right? I mean, you can be in sales, you can be in marketing, you can
Yeah.
be tech in the field, you can be a back office call center support person. So every type of job in the world has an application in broadband, right? Data science,
Yeah.
even now, right? So,
Right.
um, so if you think of anything that you've done, like if you go and you're doing marketing communication, you're thinking, okay, is broadband an area that I want to get into? Well, like I've spent 30 plus years in the sales and marketing kind of side of it, right? And so there is a role for any type of person in broadband. I would say that, right? And so whether you're a craftsperson, tradesperson, or the white collar type staff, and you will be part of making the world a better place. That's like at the end of the day, that's kind of what we do, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that has never been lost on me. And I would say, somebody coming out of school, you can go into sales. You could be working for Ford, GM, whoever, right? You could take
Yeah.
that route of sales, or you can come into a broadband company, which is trying to hire young, aggressive people, right? That want to grow their career, and you're the thing about broadband that I love is it's a global business, but the delivery is always local. And so
Totally.
that from a sales perspective, you're actually going out into your own community and
Right.
enabling people, right? So, you know, there's always a spot for every type of person in the broadband business. So that's
Completely
the way I
agree.
would look at it. Your career is not limited based on the education background that you've come from, because I'm actually meeting people now who started as a lineman and now they're the head of operations in their company. So they
Yeah.
learned from like right from boots on the ground right up to now they're running a team of 500 people, right? And so
Amazing.
the growth in your career, I've gone from being a manufacturing engineer to a CEO, and that kind of career progression is available to people who have the passion for it and want to put in
Yeah.
the effort to succeed. And a lot of companies actually and industries can't necessarily say that kind of career trajectory is available to people. So
Yeah. I completely agree. I think this is a big reason why I have this podcast, is because I think that anybody that really takes a look into what broadband even is and what we do, they're like, "Oh wow, that is important." Because you wouldn't even think about, like you were talking about earlier, a hospital not being able to send an MRI somewhere else. You don't even think about that.
yeah,
But that's the difference between possibly saving somebody's life or curing something or so
yeah,
it's so much deeper than, can I scroll on my phone, which even, I mean, that might even get people's attention more now than you would think, but it's incredibly important. And like you're saying, there are so many job opportunities. I was a third grade teacher before I got into this industry. Never did I ever
Yeah.
think I'd be here, but I wouldn't be able to teach my students without internet. They all have their little computers, and so yeah, it's incredibly important. Thank
I'll
you.
tell you one other story. So this week, I was in northern Quebec, our
Yeah.
Digicom business, which was one of the acquisitions that Pomegranate did. And Digicom just celebrated its 30th anniversary. So we had a team. Some of the folks went skydiving. I went playing golf. My
Gosh.
skydiving days are over.
Oh
But
my
so
gosh.
yeah, anyway, it was lots of good little activities. And then we came together in the evening. And one of the co-founders, he spoke, and he's the technical co-founder, Christine Marion, who's the president of Digicom. She's the sales and marketing co-founder, right? And so Gilles presented the OSI stack. That was his presentation. And he goes, why am I showing you this? And so it's a techie view of the world, right? He said, well, like there's different levels. And he said, we're down at layer 0. We're the plumbing, right? And he said, the further up the stack you go, like at the top, layer 7, you have your Facebook and things like that. So
Right.
when the layer 7 protocol is not working, he said, what do you do? Like you can still get your email, you can reboot your phone, you can do something else, right?
Yeah.
And he said, you can go and find other ways to communicate.
Right.
When the plumbing goes, nobody communicates. And he says,
Boom.
we are the plumbing, right? And so
Um,
we enable all, we are the underpinning of every other layer. So
Yeah.
I like it was a technical pitch, but I'm thinking, oh, that's not a bad way of thinking about it, right? So,
I like that.
yeah.
It's a good way for people that are on the outside looking in to really understand how important it is.
Yeah.
I like
So
that
I
a
have a
lot.
question for you,
Yes.
given that you're, former third grade school teacher, now in broadband. So what excites you about moving into the broadband business?
So initially, I think the fact that I didn't know anything was really exciting to me. I understood the basics of what it was, but not in depth at all. And really, since starting this podcast and being able to speak to other leaders in the industry about the importance of broadband and just talking about real world examples, like grandma lives a little bit off the map, but she still wants to be able to FaceTime her grandchildren, or um, hospitals being like telemedicine. Maybe someone lives a little bit out of the way, something happens. Um, First responders, you want your first responders to be able to get there as fast as they can and not lose connection. I saw something the other day that was a police officer is driving in a rural area. He has to pull someone over, but he can't get out of his car because he's not connected to another dispatcher, so it wouldn't be safe. Like there's so many things and so many other professions that we carry.
Rely on, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Back to the word of plumbing, right?
We're the plumbing, exactly. Yeah. And so I have really found a passion for it. And also I found a passion for, because I was a teacher, there are so many students that I had that would say, oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a police officer. I want to be a teacher. But then there were some kids that they didn't know, but they were so good with technology, or they were super creative. And I'm looking back now and I'm like, wow, these kids will thrive in this industry, but it's not super talked about in schools.
Yeah.
It's just like the push of what college are you going to?
Yeah.
Some kids aren't going to thrive in college. Some kids need to put their boots on and go like work their way up, learn through the industry. Yeah. So that's another area that I found passion in, is trying to bring this industry and the careers that are in this industry into schools and make it more of, I have a Instagram profile, and it's bringing influence to infrastructure, just bringing attention, making it a hot topic, because it's not, but it should be.
Yeah. I just finished up a 4-year stint on the board of a group in my home province called TechNL. And one of the things that they launched was Tech is Making Waves in Newfoundland. And they actually went to high schools and had students come on board as like interns for a while, but promoting tech at the high school level, because a lot of people like you talk to somebody in grade 9, how many people say I want to be a broadband tech, right? Like 0. And how many people, I'm going to be a sales and marketing executive in a broadband company. Well, people don't even think about that, right? And
Right.
so bringing that knowledge of tech as a career path.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in grade 9 many years ago, and and my two daughters want to be lawyers. And in grade 9, I was going to become a lawyer
Mm.
until this gentleman showed up on career day from Mobil Oil. And he talked about, this great career that petroleum engineers could have. You make lots of money. You can go to exotic places in the world like Saudi Arabia, explore for oil all around the world, right? And I'm thinking, I'm going to do engineering. And so I started at Memorial doing mechanical engineering, and then I was going to transfer to the University of Alberta to finish in petroleum engineering. And they wouldn't take my credit, so I finished mechanical engineering at Memorial in Newfoundland. But sometimes you just got to have that idea or seed planted, but planted, at the right point as you're thinking about life and the future.
Yeah.
And like I earlier said, like every single person, independent of their role, there is something that you could do to help enable the broadband infrastructure in North America, Canada, the US, and around the world for that matter.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap us up here. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights into rural broadband and sharing your passion. It's just been incredibly valuable, and it's clear that your work has not only shaped the industry, but continues to inspire the next generation like myself. So for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's passionate about the future of infrastructure. This has been another episode of Field Notes. Thank you so much for listening. That's it from the field. Stay grounded.